Now JSF stands for Java Server Faces. It's a framework for structuring your front end of your application. Now JSF is a clean and non-intrusive way of structuring your front end. By non-intrusive, I mean that most of the times you will be writing business logic in plain old Java objects, that is POJOs. Whereas, if you have tried any framework other than JSF, you must have realized that you have to twist your head according to how the framework works, while it's the reverse over here. You will be concentrating on writing your business logic and creating your pages. All the plumbings are taken care by the JSF framework. So we have already seen database design, we have seen how to create JPA entities, we have seen how to create EJBs, and now we move on to this layer, the web layer. And the main thing we are going to discuss in this layer is JSF. We are not going to discuss JSP and servlets. Before we even start writing our first JSF page, let's discuss the topic of scopes. So right now we are going to concentrate on request, session, and application scope. There are some other scopes in JSF like none, view, and flash, which we'll see later on. So scope basically means a certain time duration. So let's start with request scope. So for request scope, the client or the browser creates a request or sends a request to the server. The server processes the request and sends a response back to the client. So the boundary of request scope is when the client request comes in to when the server responds to the client request. So as you can see, request has a very small time duration which starts when the request comes in to when the server responds to the request. So here I've shown a server with many requests coming in. So in the first case, when the client issues a request, the request scope starts. And when the client request gets fulfilled, the request scope ends. When the same client issues another request, then another request scope starts and it ends when the request gets fulfilled. The objects in this scope has no relation to objects in this scope, even though they are from the same client. So whether it's the same client or different client, each request response cycle will have different objects related to the request scope. Now session scope is per user. That means that all requests from a particular client are always serviced by the same session object, whereas in request scope, each request response had a different request object, whereas here all the requests from a particular client are always serviced by the same object. So for this client, there is a different session object. So session scope is good for storing client specific information like shopping cart or maybe the client's username. So what happens if the client doesn't access a session for a long time? Will it just keep on hanging? Actually not. In the server web configuration file, we can specify for how long this session can remain without being accessed. So we can specify the idle timeout. So after that timeout period expires and the client hasn't accessed the session, then the session gets destroyed. So here I have shown how the session is actually maintained. So initially when client issues a request, the server creates a session object and then assigns a session ID to the session. When the server responds, it sends a cookie with the session ID in it. Now whenever this client issues any other request to the server, it sends that cookie with the session ID in it. Now the server searches all its sessions and searches for the session with that particular session ID, and then it responds using that session. So as you can see, the session information is not actually passed between the client and the server. Only the session ID is passed, and by using that session ID, the server is able to identify the client. Now application scope is per application. So if we create an application object, it is shared by all the clients. It's sort of a global storage for all the clients, and it lasts from application deployments to its undeployment. So when the application gets deployed to the server, the scope comes into play and it ends when the application is undeployed. So let's revise the scopes once again. So a request scope object lasts when the request comes in and it's destroyed when the request is responded to. So session scope is per user. So for each request from the same client, we'll always hit the same objects. So for this request or this request, the session object is same, unlike request scope where different request objects were responding to different requests even from the same client. Session scope has same object for all the requests. So application scope is per application. So all requests from all the clients are always responded by or always fired to the same application objects.